All right. I reckon let's make a start. 5:03. Okay. So, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today and for being on time. It's really great to have so many people here and to see so much enthusiasm about science communication. So my name is Rachel Vorwerk. I'm a science communicator and the current science communications coordinator at the newly funded Australian Research Council Centre of Excellence in Optical Microcombs for Breakthrough Science, or COMS for short. And I'll be your MC for this afternoon. For the past 3 years, I've been working at RMIT in the Integrated Photonics and Applications Centre, working with a team of about 40 researchers and being really on the front line with them in trying to make their work more accessible to a broader audience. And some of you may have actually seen me present at the Australian Science Communicators conference earlier this year. And I spoke about this experience of being embedded within a small research team. And a quick shout out to Lisa Bailey. I'm not sure if you're here today, Lisa, but it was Lisa that suggested that we do a follow-on of that conference talk, but actually from the perspective of the research leader, in this case, Arnan Mitchell. And that is a great segue to introducing Arnan. So Distinguished Professor Arnan Mitchell is here with me today. Arnan's the director of the Integrated Photonics and Applications Centre and the new ARC Centre of Excellence in Optical Microcombs for Breakthrough Science. And you may have heard those two words already, those two centres already, and that's because I've been working with Arnan for almost 6 years. Meaning that he's been investing in science communication for for more than half a decade. So we'll cover more on that later. Today, I'm coming to you from the lands of the Woiwurrung and Bunwurrung people of the Eastern Kulin Nation. And these are the lands where I live and work. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders in the webinar today. If you haven't already, please share in the chat which land you're tuning in from today. I've already seen so much action in there already, so keep it going. Okay, some housekeeping. Before we hear from Arnan, I just wanted to run through a few things and sort of talk about why we've done it this way. So you'll notice that we are in a meeting right now rather than a webinar. And the reason we did that is so you're still able to verbally ask questions. We're trying to emulate what it's like in a lecture theatre to keep that interaction. If you do wish to ask a question, can I please request that you put your question in the chat first? So type it out in the chat, and then you'll be called upon if we read out your question. Think of it as the same as being in a lecture theatre and we're walking around with mics and giving you the mic when you're ready to ask your question. And a big thanks to those of you who have already asked your question in Eventbrite. We've got those on hand, so we'll aim to address those either in Arnan's presentation or during the Q&A at the end. So as you can see, there are quite a few people in this meeting, which is great. But we do ask that you be respectful and only unmute yourselves when you're called upon for a question. I really thank you for your cooperation with this in advance. And another note, the webinar is being recorded. You will have seen that notification earlier. If you don't wish to be recorded, please turn off your video and your audio. And also, if you'd like to ask a question, you can do so in the chat, but maybe just write in brackets, I'd prefer if you ask the question for me, Rachel, so you don't have to ask the question via your audio. The recording of this webinar will go live in a few months. We're not sure what platform yet, but as an attendee, you'll be notified when that's available. All right, now on to the webinar. We'll start the session with a presentation from Arnan, and then we'll finish the webinar off with Q&A. And we've tried to allow quite a bit of time for this Q&A as well, so we can delve into any questions that you have. And just another reminder, if you've got a question, pop it in the chat. Tom and I, Tom's helping out in the back end. Thank you, Tom. We'll be going through your questions and we'll call upon you for when we're ready for you to ask the question. So, Arnan, over to you. We're excited to hear about how long-term science communication is a damn good investment.
Thanks, Rachel. Thanks for that introduction, and it's a real pleasure to be here. And I'm a little bit nervous, sort of doing the inverse of your presentation.
Good luck.
I'll do my best. Let me just see if I can start off by sharing my screen. Okay, are you seeing that?
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. All right. So before I start, I'd also like to note that I'm actually in Perth. So I'd like to acknowledge the Whadjuk people from the Perth region and their elders, past, present, and also any First people in the audience today as well. So it was I really jumped at the opportunity that Rachel put to me to talk about my experience of working with her over the last 3 or maybe even more years in really trying to explore how we can use science communication to really drive a research team. And so hopefully I'll give you some insights into how that's evolved over the time that we've been working together on this. So I'm Arnan Mitchell. I'm from RMIT University. I wear a number of hats. I'll probably cover most of those hats as I go through. I'd like to tell you just a little bit about myself before we get started. So when I was a child, I was really inspired by Carl Sagan and the television show Cosmos. And so this is sort of in the 1980s. Learning about the universe. I've heard a lot of astronomers who have been inspired by Carl Sagan, who's a fantastic science communicator and also a fantastic scientist. But I was sort of more intrigued by the physics, and he talked about light as being the only thing that was constant in the universe. And so this really made me think, well, there's something special about light. I'd better learn as much as possible about this. And just note, I was about 8 at this time, so this is really sort of setting me up for what do I want to do? I want to learn about light. That's really what I decided I wanted to do. I was also fascinated by computers, and I shared with Rachel a story where my sort of parents sent me off to computer camp because I was a bit of a handful. This isn't a picture of me. This is actually a promotional photograph by the company that made the VIC-20 computer, but that is actually the first computer that I encountered back in the 1980s. And so I wanted to know what was going on inside these computers and how they worked, what these microchips were. So perhaps it's not surprising that what I do is actually my research is all about microchips, the technology that enables computers, but using light. So light instead of electricity is coursing around on the surface of this chip. And so this is actually a picture of a chip that we really designed and made at RMIT University. And so we have the ability to actually sort of make these sorts of chips here in Australia, which is something we've really been working on for quite some years. So that's a little bit about my context, and to some extent also my motivation. So I've been following my curiosity since I was a child. I've been trying to learn as much as I can about computers and as much as I can about light. And as I became more and more successful as an academic and doing lots of research projects, my team was growing. And so this is a picture of the research team that I led back in 2012. It's a pretty huge team. It sort of dawned on me that if I just kept following my curiosity and wasn't really, paying attention on what were all these people going to be doing as we were doing PhDs with them and taking on all these postdocs, they had lots of opportunities to pursue their research careers and industrial careers overseas, but there wasn't really opportunities for them to stay and work with us in Australia because there wasn't the sort of industrial ecosystem. So about that time, so about 10 years ago, I really sort of shifted gears and thought, I need to actually focus on real end user engagement and actually sort of creating an environment that, either discovering what environment already exists in Australia and working out how our photonic chip technology can improve that and work with that, or actually sort of create the environment. So as I graduate PhD students and postdoctoral students, they've actually got a sort of a industrial ecosystem that they can move into. So this is sort of a little bit of a cartoon of how at that time I thought research worked. So basically, you would do something interesting, you'd come up with some interesting research idea and do interesting research. And then, if it worked out really well, you might try and get it published in a high-profile paper. And, in our field, Nature Photonics is about the top of the range there. And if you could do that, then you might be able to get the media to cover it. So once you've got it accepted in a high-profile publication, then you think about, how do I get sort of traction with the media? What stories do I want to be telling about this? And then that will get noticed by some sort of end user, and that end user would perhaps be able to sort of create a new opportunity, and some resources would manifest. And so the flow is from ideas and resources getting pushed in at the research end, and science communication might happen in the middle if you get that far, and then the value manifests at the output. Sometimes that's sort of the traditional view that I had probably back then. But since then, I have sort of tried to understand better how to engage with end users, and so to this end, I've done a couple of the CSIRO-On's CSIRO's excellent program in the CSIRO-On scheme. So there's CSIRO-On Accelerate and CSIRO-On. So CSIRO-On Accelerate we did particularly. And the mission there is to try and create impact, is to get technology out of the lab and into the real world. And in principle, that's about commercialization, but it can also just be about engaging with end users who may not understand what your technology is, and you may not understand what the opportunity for your technology is. And the approach is to really engage with end users first. So discover what the opportunity is and what they need, and then work out what research needs to be done and what development needs to be done in order to address that need. And that if you do things that way around, you've got a much better chance of creating impact than if you do all the research and development based on curiosity and then hope that there's some use for it when you go out into the real world. Something that really struck me from this experience really was, okay, I'm an engineer, I have a background in science, and it's all about sort of facts and quantities, but actually decisions are almost always made on the basis of emotions. And so it isn't about how good your technology is or science, it's how whoever's making a decision feels about it and engages with it. And that's really, I think, probably the most important thing I pulled away from this experience. These are just some of the books that I read during this time, and I've tried to summarize in a few words at the end what I got out of it. So, the book Sapiens really is about belief, and truth is important, but belief isn't always the same as truth. And so convincing people, even if you're trying to convince them of the truth, is very important. Learning actually how to effectively talk to people is really, really important. And, I assume that this is the whole point of science communication. But being able to do those kind of soft skills in a scientific way, that's really what the lean startup approach is applying scientific method to how well this is working. So taking those ideas, we can actually flip the model around. And so if you remember the order previously, what you're about to see is essentially the reverse. So what we do now with the lean model is focus on where value manifests. So value manifests when an end user is engaged and your science or technology is actually addressing their need. That's impact. That's where the value manifests. And so that then creates a need for ideas and for that, which in order for that to happen, they've got to know about you. They've got to know who you are. They've got to know what you're doing. And that creates a need for traction with the media and other sorts of news sources. In order to get that sort of traction, you need to have high profile publications, perhaps, in order for there to be a news story to promote. And that then needs some pretty good research to generate that. And so the flow is in the same direction, but it starts at the end. So you're actually pulling out the value, and then that pulls in resources. And so it's sort of another way of thinking about it. But what it means is that science communication is now up the front, and science communication becomes it's not just getting your stuff into the media, it's the first step of engaging with your end users. And then that pulls the whole thing along. So the conclusion there is that, for me, was that science communication is really, really important. In fact, quintessentially important. The success of your whole endeavor is going to be based on your ability to actually sort of find and talk to potential end users who you might work with to create impact. And so this comes first. So I'd like to sort of frame this in the context of a specific story, and it's a story of failure to begin with. So this is a fairly high-profile grant application that I put in probably in about 2018, and I was actually quite curious about this review. So the reviewer says straight up the bat, as part of their review, that when they did the review, they didn't know who I was, and okay, for them to put that into their assessment of me, they must have thought that was important enough to let me know about it. So they are telling me they didn't already know who I was before reading the application. But they do actually say that even though that was the case, they actually thought, I really did a very good, convincing job of putting the proposal together. I didn't win the grant, but they actually liked the grant, but in the context of not already knowing who I was. And so they were surprised to discover that even though they didn't know who I was, I actually made a pretty convincing case, but apparently not convincing enough to actually win the grant. So the hypothesis is, if the assessor had already known who I was and had a positive opinion of me, maybe that they would have had the same positive assessment of, yes, and I'm having my positive preconceptions view confirmed by the grant, but that might have actually pushed it over the line. So, but this is really the hypothesis. And so the methodology I used here was to basically hire a science communicator to be part of the research team. And so this is the Integrated Photonics and Application Center, and it's not quite as big as my team was in 2012. So this is deliberately focusing a little bit more, but starting to think about the team as actually having more components than just researchers, sort of introducing Rachel. And this is actually a slide I've borrowed from Rachel's presentation that she gave at the Science Communication Conference, and she wanted to point out that it was perhaps a little bit lonely being the only science communicator in the team. So we're looking to sort of maybe recruit another science communicator as well, so we've got a slightly more balanced team. So Rachel asked me to come up with 5 objectives, just to really sort of crystallize what it was that we were going to try and do here. And so, just repeating the hypothesis, if this assessor had a positive opinion of me and us before reading the application, perhaps that would have improved their assessment of us to the point where it was, just over the line rather than just not quite over the line. So the objectives. We thought that, I do a lot of different things. I do many, many different things. And it can be a bit confusing and difficult to know what to focus on. And so I thought, in order to be able to tell a really simple story, it'd be good to be known for one thing that was specific and identifiable. People go, oh, yes, you're the person who did this. And That's not something that I want. It's just something that I think is important to tell a simple story to assessors. I think that, okay, this is phrased in a way that it's about me, because it was initially about this fellowship application that we were putting together. But actually, I thought, well, if we were investing in this using kind of the team's resources, it had better be a benefit to the team. And so we need to sort of create a brand that team members can use independently of me, rather than, and they get the benefit of the success that the whole team has, rather than it just being me. I wanted to create or engage with an actual industrial sustainable ecosystem. And so in order to do that, people need to recognize me and us as thought leaders, people who actually are credibly engaging with industrial end users and actually doing real work. So that's a really important point. A subtle point is, because I work on microchips aren't all that interesting on their own. It's what you can do with them that's interesting, and often that isn't me. Often that's people who I collaborate with are using the microchips that we create to do something interesting. So often it's them who are the first or last authors on a paper, and it's they who would be recognized as leading the research. So how do we get recognition? So it's important that we are able to promote collaboratively. Yes, this person achieved this result, but it was a joint effort. It was because we have these excellent platforms that they were able to do their excellent research. And this is actually in the name of the Combs Centre. It's the Centre for Optical Microcombs. That's our chips for breakthrough science. That's the things that we're going to be able to achieve with this. And then the part of the engine that really makes this work is that, okay, if we succeed in doing all this science communications, it actually delivers not just resources, not just money, but actually really high quality students and postdocs and people who want to sort of get involved and engage with us. That's a really important aspect of this. So it's a means to an end. The hot science communication is about sort of feeding the engine and drawing things along. To just give you an example of one of the tangible things that have come out of this. So I've got a snapshot here from Rachel of her social media calendar. She's sort of color coded and identified all of the social media events and how they're actually addressing some of those outcomes, so that we can say, oh yes, we need to say more about this, or particularly highlight this aspect of this, so that we know that we're achieving those objectives. So I've got 2 case studies. I had 3 case studies. I thought I'd compress that down a little bit so we had a bit more time for conversation, but I'll stick to 2 case studies. So my observation and my previous engagements with the RMIT University Media team was they want to keep it simple. They want one lead university and preferably one lead researcher. So and to have a simple media release. They particularly don't want to get into a sort of a complex negotiation between who's leading, and people arguing about who's leading it. So in general, when we came with highly complicated multidisciplinary engagements, it often didn't gain traction because it was just too complicated to deal with. But the problem for me is that's almost always the case. So almost all of the things that I was doing were a little bit complicated, and so this was a big problem, and this is sort of a big issue that we tried to solve here. So the hypothesis here is, if we have our own science communicator who is essentially neutral, we could coordinate multiple universities on a media release and actually have a successful collaborative outcome. And so this case study is about the world's fastest internet from a single photonic chip that we did in 2020. And basically what we showed was that we could get a data transmission from a chip, and you can see this is a $2 coin. Let me just put my laser pointer on. So this is a $2 coin. This is the chip. Here's the actual functional component, and it's less than a millimeter long, and that generates channels for enough information, which is essentially the entire capacity of the NBN down one fiber, and we basically sent that to Monash University and back again. So this was the result. It was actually the original concept of Bill Corcoran, who's part of my team, but is at Monash University, and Dave Moss, who's the Deputy Director of the ARC Centre of Excellence, Combs, and produced this Nature paper. So Nature Communications, not the top ranked Nature paper, but it's pretty good. And it's got this rather technical title, bit hard to sort of explain who that is to somebody who might be interested. And you can see there's a lot of researchers from 3 universities. The research was actually done at RMIT. The demonstration was done from RMIT, but by a Monash University researcher, leading as a early mid-career researcher, and Dave Moss is senior researcher from Swinburne. So basically, the hypothesis was if we could get Rachel to coordinate the 3 university media offices, we could come up with a successful collaborative set of media releases. And so Rachel put a lot of effort into navigating the diplomacy of doing this. We nominally had Monash as the lead to really give Bill, the early mid-career researcher, a boost. And so Monash came up with this press release. And importantly, we wanted to name all 3 universities just to show that this was possible and we would get traction with that. And then this is Swinburne's media release. You can then see again, all 3 universities mentioned here. And this is RMIT's media release, and again, all 3 universities mentioned here. So we wanted to see that all 3 universities got sort of recognition. We put together a conversation article. So Bill Corcoran took the lead on that, and tried to make it a bit more accessible for everybody, and really couched it. This was in the middle of the COVID lockdowns in 2020. And so he couched this as, we're all now online. We're all engaging with the internet in ways that we haven't done before. And he particularly used the example of, grandparents reading stories to their grandchildren, and tried to make it as real world for people as possible. We got some traction with the newspapers, and particularly proud of this photo, which is at RMIT with all 3 of us in it. So put a lot of effort into trying to keep it as balanced as possible. And the traction with the media was, really surprised us. It was covered in over 1,500 media outlets. It was the #1 most downloaded article in Nature Communications that year, so it's recognised as one of the most covered articles in that journal, and to some extent really put us on the map. So in terms of the if we wanted to be known for one breakthrough, this probably put a tick next to that box, I think. But importantly, did it in a collaborative way. So perhaps we got 2 ticks in the box of those objectives there. So and just to finish up, the day after we did this media release, actually there was a Q&A, and one of the audience members, was actually making an appeal on our behalf, saying had seen the media coverage of our story and was asking how could we keep this sort of technology in Australia, and how would it be developed. And I was particularly pleased that the question, they said, world's quickest internet was developed by Swinburne, Monash, and RMIT. So the message got across that it was all 3 universities. And so this is really proof that it wasn't that complicated. With a bit of diplomacy, quite a lot of work, but you can actually get this sort of complex interaction between multiple bodies actually across into the media. And just to cap it all off, Bill Corcoran last year won a mid-career fellowship. And particularly, this is the Monash press release, and actually a big part of that press release is actually the same story that was developed for that World's Fastest Internet message. And actually, probably his fellowship application really gained a lot of focus from that. So it's sort of a manifestation of that lean idea of you tell the story and then the research that's needed in order to fulfill that story manifests. So, you know, I thought this was a really nice example to give. So the next example is about the ARC Centre of Excellence. So after we succeeded in getting this media coverage, so this is also in 2020, we thought, you know, we've succeeded in communicating our collaboration really, you know, beyond our expectations. We should be able to expand this and look for something like an ARC Centre of Excellence. So an ARC Centre of Excellence, my observation of an ARC Centre of Excellence is they're looking for excellent research, but they're particularly looking for collaboration. They're looking for a whole that's more than the sum of its parts, and really trying to get this at a national scale. So we showed in Victoria you could have 3 universities collaborating. We needed to expand this to a national national level. But it needs to be real. I think that, you know, the levels of assessment and of these centres, if you came up with something that was a bit artificial, it would be pretty obvious that you were doing that. So you actually need to really do it, but you also need to do it in a way that's recognised and believed by the assessors. And so this is really what we set about to do. So we put the Centre of Excellence program is a multi-part session. So you need to put in an expression of interest, you get some feedback from that, and then you put in the full proposal. Our expression of interest, one of the reviewers was saying, oh, wow, you've got a lot of different disciplines involved. I'm not sure I'm convinced that you would actually all work together. That, you know, they actually sort of used those words. And so we thought, okay, that's, if something, you know, they were pretty positive in general, but that was one of the things that was raised as a pain point. So this is something that we really had to address, we thought. But it's very hard to convince the assessors from within the proposal. So the full proposal is over 1,000 pages, and it's, you know, it's very constrained in what you're sort of putting it in. It's also was still in the middle of the pandemic, so it was very hard for us actually to be engaging with each other physically, and you know, actually building the team. So we came up with the hypothesis that if we could demonstrate evidence that the investigators of the Centre of Excellence are already working together across multiple disciplines and really get that in front of them in a convincing way, then our assessors would have perhaps already formed the opinion that we're collaborative before they assess our proposal. So again, the idea of sort of being slightly over the line rather than slightly behind the line, because someone's coming into the assessment process already positively predisposed towards you. So Rachel put a lot of energy into, you know, as part of the bid over several months, trying to make the evidence that we had as clear as possible and as accessible as possible. And so we put together a website well in advance of the centre being funded, and you can visit that website now, talking about the applications or the different aspects of the centre, but really in the context of end user applications and where we thought, you know, societal impact would be achieved. We also tried really hard to highlight cross-node collaborations, and so you know, this picture of me here with the astronomers, which we thought, you know, technologically was perhaps the you know, the hardest story to tell, but also interstate. So this is a team from ANU that came down of seismologists from ANU, Megan Miller and her team, to basically do some experiments in Melbourne, because apparently trams are really good models for some seismic activity. So So this is a website looking at these sorts of things. Rachel also, probably the thing to focus on here is the bottom of the screen. So this is actually a webinar or just a web training that Rachel was doing with all the team members, because we couldn't all physically meet each other, on how to engage with social media. And particularly, so that we were going to use this as the vehicle to demonstrate our interaction, and particularly present a united front and look like we were part of a coordinated centre by having, up-to-date, well-organised LinkedIn profiles that clearly we'd put a bit of effort into sort of getting organised, and then we sort of sat down and came up with a matrix of all of the researchers. There's 18 of us, and tried to come up with a hash, basically, of, okay, how could this researcher be seen to interact with other researchers on these different themes, so that we could show a balance of interconnectedness. And then this is the whole table, just for context. Tried to populate as many of these squares as possible, and then actually turn those into LinkedIn posts that were actually about something real that we'd done, but just make sure there was actually evidence there. So there's, this LinkedIn post, there's one from the seismologist Megan Villa talking about their visits, Bill Corcoran talking about the world's fastest internet, David Lancaster from South Australia talking about some defence work we're doing, astronomers, microscopists in Sydney, Arthur, and so on and so forth. And so we managed to, basically show a lot of different interactions. And when it came time for the interview, and I've got to say, this was an incredibly awkward process of being interviewed on Zoom, but there we are. It was clear that they knew us. It was clear that the people interviewing us already knew about our program, because they had seen the social media, they had looked at the websites. It wasn't part of the assessment. We didn't mention it, but it was pretty clear that they'd already understood what was going on and could navigate the proposal in that way. So we believe that helped us be on the positive side of the line where we got funded. It was certainly, and it even helped us to maybe sharpen our story and actually sharpen our program as an exercise. So in November we were announced as being successful, and so we can now actually move forwards as a centre, having manifested that reality and having a budget to move forwards. So in summary, having a science communicator within the team, Rachel's been excellent at leveraging institutional communications and media teams. So it's sort of a value add. It's not a replacement for by any stretch of the imagination. She's been able to act as a neutral party in navigating multiple institutions. So the world's fastest internet's a perfect example of that. She's also been able to build trust with the researchers. She's as much as part of the team as we are. So actually having that feeling amongst everybody, you wouldn't have that amount of knowledge and trust with any central entity, really. And it also allows you to do long-term development of end user and stakeholder engagement. Often these things take years, and so being able to collaborate on the vision, the strategy, how to educate people, and how to communicate that over years is really, really valuable. And for Rachel to have insights into the objectives and parameters of the whole team means that it's easier to tell those stories without actually sort of getting caught on some limitation or some awkward conflict perhaps between people. So that these are just some of the things I can think of that are valuable about having a science communicator embedded within the team. The gotcha is, how do you fund it? And so I funded Rachel actually as a research assistant with one of my research programs, which I must say isn't on science communication. So it was on the research that Rachel was communicating. So I saw it as okay, this is reasonable. but it essentially, the way I thought about it is I put an overhead on my research projects, and I've got a lot of research projects, so I can do that. And that was enough to pay for a person's salary. I've tried to put science communicator in as a budget item in various projects and been told I had to take it out because it wasn't an appropriate expense. So, I don't know, Center of Excellence, perfect. Yes, you're meant to have science communicators in that. But the truth is you need it earlier. We needed it in order to win that Center of Excellence. So who pays for the science communicator embedded in a team? Perhaps it can be funded from institutional central funds, but is that going to get confusing? Because that's probably where the funding for central teams comes from. So how do you make the decision about, which teams will get an embedded communicator, and what is their role in connection with central teams? So this is an open question, and maybe some of your questions to me might be about this as well. So what's next? And I'm on my second last slide, so I'll be quiet in a moment. I clearly recognize the value, and I'd recommend this model. To science communicators, I'd like to say it's a bit of a risk. It's a bit like having a startup within an organization. It's not necessarily going to work. But there is a lot of license and opportunity to build something from scratch. So you can sort of help shape what it turns into. But you'd really have to ask Rachel actually what it's really been like. To research leaders, I would suggest actually investing in this early. Don't wait until you've got that great outcome to promote. Don't try and, it's been accepted by the paper, now I've got to go and find a science communicator. You really need to be thinking about what the whole point of the exercise is, maybe even a year in advance. And this pays dividends. And I think I've shown a couple of pieces of evidence of that. So last slide, feel free to reach out. You can sort of visit both the Impact website and also the Combs website to see, a lot of Rachel's excellent work on case studies and communicating the work that we've been doing. But also feel free to email or connect on LinkedIn. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Arnan. It's very interesting hearing all of that from your perspective, and I hope others found it interesting as well. I think particularly looking at your mindset shift about 10 years ago is a really interesting thing to see how you then have framed science communication going forward. I think it's a really integral shift compared to how you used to view it in the past, which was that more sort of traditional method that you talked about. So just a reminder to everyone that if you do have any questions, pop them in the chat. We've got a bit of a backlog of questions from the Eventbrite original registration form as well. So I'll go through those. But while I ask my first question to you, Arnan, just a reminder, pop your questions in the chat and then we can go through them. So the first question, Arnan, I'm directing this at you and not myself, is from Shobi Kasava. And the question is, how can we tie science communications to profitability? Are there examples of how this has been done successfully? So I think you did touch on your two case studies, but I guess directly speaking about the profitability of science communication is a slightly different thing. So
yeah, look, I think it's going to be almost impossible to be quantitative and direct. I think that we tried these things, they seem to work. The case study I left out was about where we thought that it would be valuable to be working in a particular area, and so communicated a bit about that area in different contexts, and then actually had an industry partner from that area come to us and actually make a real project with us and fund us developing the thing that we thought it would be nice to do. And so again, it's sort of, using science communication as a way of kind of, having an idea about something that you would think would be impactful, and then actually making that real. So, I think that's, essentially in terms of, market development and actually, but starting with the end user engagement, it means that, okay, if all of your things started with an end user engagement, you could be guaranteed having an end user for everything you worked on. I'm not sure that's a direct answer to the question, though.
Yeah, I think yeah, I think it was answered in that the industry funding is the way that you demonstrate the profitability from the science communication. It's always hard to draw a direct tangible line between the two, but the most you can say, this is what I've found, is by saying, well, the science communication didn't hurt in making that investment happen. So yeah, it was a good question though, Shobi. Thank you. Okay, we had a question in the chat. Some of these are directed at me. So Michelle, would you like to unmute yourself? Ask your question?
Sure. If it's this Michelle you mean?
Yes.
I'm just
hello, Michelle.
Hello. I'm just wondering, what is your typical day like, Rachel? Or is there a typical day?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's definitely a lot more diverse than roles I've had before in a media team in a broader institution. I feel like I'm doing so many different things every single day, and no 2 days are the same, which is a massive benefit. I really like working like that in my role. What am I doing? I'm doing a lot of social media. I do a lot of one-on-one training with researchers, which I actually really love. I get to actually sit down with them and say, well, what are you aiming for? Is it a future fellowship? Is it a laureate? Is it I don't know, do you want to speak at this conference? And so then we sort of map out a strategy specific to that researcher. That feels like a very luxurious thing that I have time to work on, but I really love that sort of empowering of researchers. I also work with the media team at RMIT quite a bit to try and filter sort of stories that could be beneficial for not only our centre, but for RMIT as well. And I'm trying to think what else, but yeah, a lot of different things on any given day, which is a real benefit of the job, I would say. Thanks for your question, Michelle. Okay, so we've got some other questions. Okay, Robert Shen, thanks for your question. Did you want to read that out loud if you'd like to unmute yourself?
Thanks, Rachel, and a great talk. I guess my question is quite simple. It's great to have people like Rachel. For a small team, any tips on effective science communication with other people like Rachel? Luckily, we sometimes don't have that luxury to have people like Rachel on board. Any tips on effective science communication?
I might, so Robert, we've actually done some science communication with you before. So probably the first thing to do is, collaborate. And I think that's a good example. But part of what Rachel's has been doing is really trying to train people to be able to do the science communication themselves, particularly simplify their story, make it accessible, learn what's interesting, and also how to get it out there, how to use social media, how to engage with traditional media. Although I think social media is probably more common and more regular than the traditional media. Rachel, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I would say, I think it plays into this next question actually that I was going to ask you. I think there are things you can do as a researcher yourself in terms of science communication, but I think one of the biggest benefits I see as being separate to the research team or not in that same area of research as the researchers is that I have this clear I've got a clearly defined fresh perspective of people's research. I think when you're a part of the research team, it's actually really hard to see what the big purpose of your research is and to be able to communicate that. And I think it's just about investing in someone else to be able to talk about your research in a way that other people can understand. It's hard to do that when you're so stuck in the weeds of your own research. But I think a follow-on question to that, which someone asked from Eventbrite, is How do you logistically make long-term science communication work in a tight budget?
Good question. I mean, I think if you so Rachel, when you started, you weren't working full time. I mean, you were working, I think, 3 days a week or something like that. But you could probably make a start with less than that. I mean, I think 1 day a week might be a little bit subcritical, but maybe 2 days a week might work. But even that is a reasonable investment. I mean, you are talking, tens of thousands of dollars a year. But I think, like, okay, if you've got, I mean, okay, you probably do need to have projects, so you need to have tens of thousands of dollars to spend in a year. But really, I was sort of weighing up the value or benefit of, okay, should I invest that in more postdoc time to do more research, or should I be investing that in making sure that the postdoc time I've got is actually sort of gaining more traction and doing that? And I think, probably, I'm not sure where I would strike the balance. I mean, you saw the size of the team that I've got. Probably only half of that team is PhD students and half of it's postdocs. So there's probably, I don't know, about 10 postdocs in the team. So, you're one science communicator for 10 postdocs. That's, we could probably use 2. So, how many postdocs have you got in your team? Probably a fifth, about a fifth of that time you could think of about as investing in science communication. It's a bit tough because usually postdocs come in quantized as one person. So it's a bit hard to say, okay, well, I'll take, 2/5 of a postdoc, but again, also not sure that I answered the question. I mean, even at my scale, which I'll admit is probably bigger than most, it was a pretty, okay, this is, I'm going to actually, essentially take a postdoc salary and instead put it into a science communicator. That you've sort of got to bite the bullet a little bit.
Yep. Okay, great. We have another question from Eventbrite again, which said, speaking about these sort of suite of benefits for scientists, thanks to science communication, did you ever consider a science PR agency?
Well, that's how we met.
Yes. and I think, yes, I think it's a good thing to.
So I mean, probably following that old model. Yes, we actually got in a couple of experiences with different science PR agencies, but it's sort of like a 2-week burst of okay, I've got this big event coming out. I need to get a lot of media buzz on it. Let's get a PR agency in, and so we've done that a few times, and it's okay. I mean, in as much as it as it works, it's okay. But I think for a long-term thing like trying to build a center of excellence or trying to create a platform that Bill can win his future fellowship on, that can take years. And I think okay, maybe you could and I think in Combs, for example, we may pull in PR agencies for particular things that we actually really want to get. Okay, we want to get as much buzz out of this as possible, but we will have spent 6 months of strategizing about, okay, that's the one we really need to get a lot of attention on, and it's worth turbocharging with a PR agency. So there's certainly value in that. It's just not the same as long-term strategic investment.
Yeah. Okay. I'm conscious of the time. Emma Burns, I see that you have a question in the chat. We'll make this the last question. Would you like to read it out?
Sure. Thanks so much for the talk. It was fantastic. So I was just wondering, and I was really curious about the strategy, because I think one of the things that for any of us who are managing our own comms that we find overwhelming is just sort of knowing where to start or how to build that strategy so it's sustainable, and sort of related to someone's later question of like, you don't have any news at some point, how do you fill in the spaces so that you don't people don't forget about you, that kind of thing. So I guess if you have any recommendations about how to start building that strategy, how to think about it and how to make it sustainable, that would be great.
Yeah. It's a good question. So I think I was very overwhelmed at the start when I started at the center, and I thought, where do you even start in making a strategy? Where I started was asking Arnan, what are 5 objectives that you would like to achieve? And everything over the past 3 years has stemmed from those 5 objectives that Arnan set. It means that every social media post is linked to one of those broad objectives, and it helps my inspiration and motivation levels as well, because when you're writing LinkedIn posts day in, day out, they can get quite monotonous. But if you can link it to a broader objective of, we want a integrated photonic chip manufacturing pipeline in Victoria, and you're thinking that as you're writing a LinkedIn post, it's pretty inspiring. So I would just start with the very first thing of asking the researcher to identify 5 key objectives and aligning all of your comms to that. And then you'll see other tactics come out of that need to be interwoven that will also be linked to those broader objectives. More than happy to chat more about that as well. Okay, so we have 1 minute left. It's time to wrap up the webinar. Thank you so much for all your questions. I realized we didn't get through them all, but I'm really thankful for the engagement. So I guess 2 key things that I'd love for you to take away from this. If you're a research leader, I hope we've given you a case study to take away and convince you that long-term investment in science communication is worth it. If you are a science communicator, I really hope that this gives you inspiration to ask your research leaders for potential science communication role in the future of further investment. So if you'd like to find out any more about any of this, Arnan and I are happy to be emailed directly. I might put Tom might be putting that in the chat as I speak. Thank you, Tom. Feel free to reach out. We're more than happy to sort of share our knowledge in this. And lastly, a massive thank you to Arnan for being such a big science communication advocate and for spending your time with us. But also a massive shout out to Joanna and Tom from the Australian Science Communicators as well, who've helped in bringing this together. It's been a true team effort, so thank you. All right, that's it from me. Thank you for coming and enjoy your evening.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Rachel.